Hey everyone, welcome to the February 14th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona here, back with my usual co-host Craig Mulkowski. You might have noticed that we did drop the podcast out of order this week as we put out the TimeformUS forecast yesterday. Just a situation where Craig was going to take some time off at the end of the week, and I asked Marcus to come on and do the forecast, and he suggested putting it out early since Fairgrounds draws their races so early, so I thought that might be a win-win both for us and the listeners. So you can check that out on all the channels where you usually find our podcast. Marcus and I handicapped that Fairgrounds late pick 5 on Saturday, but on this podcast, the Pacecast, Craig and I are going to be looking backwards to recap last weekend. And Craig, we saw plenty of 3-year-old action, 3 points qualifiers for the Kentucky Derby. I'm not sure how many actual Kentucky Derby candidates we saw in those races. There were also some maiden and allowance races for the 3-year-olds that we'll discuss, but this Derby picture is very slowly taking shape, and I'm not sure how many answers we got this weekend.
Yeah, particularly at Tampa, where I know we're going to start. I was pretty disappointed when I sat down to make the speed figures for both that and the Suncoast. With these 3-year-olds, you never really know what you were going to get, what you're going to get because you get a lot of horses improving sometimes. I don't want to knock the horses too much. It's still early February. There's still room to grow, but just numerically, it was kind of a meh weekend, as the young folks say.
Yes, definitely feel that. Not too many of those 120 plus TimeformUS speed figures to talk about this week, or actually really any of them, as there just weren't particularly fast races this weekend. But like we said at the top, we're talking about a lot of 3-year-olds who we're just looking for those incremental improvements at this time of year, and we did see that from a few horses, particularly at Aqueduct, which we're going to get to a little bit later in the podcast. But as Craig was saying, let's begin with Tampa Bay Downs and talk about the Sam F. Davis and the Suncoast, those preps that they ran for the Derby and Oaks respectively. And as far as the Grade 3 Sam F. Davis goes, Craig, it's just hard to know what to make of this race. Litigate got the job done as the second choice in the wagering for trainer Todd Pletcher, but like you were saying, the speed figure came back pretty slow. There were some changing weather conditions throughout the day at Tampa on Saturday, just steady rain falling, especially right before this race, that really changed the track condition, and it felt like a lot of horses maybe just didn't handle the surface, but even the winner just didn't run particularly fast.
Yeah, but David, it didn't change the track condition. I'm looking
Yes.
at the chart now, and it says fast. But honestly, though, the track speed didn't change as far as I could tell. All the races were pretty consistent. That's not a big surprise at Tampa. If anything, you would think the water would speed up the track a bit, particularly the way it was there, where it wasn't a downpour. It just kind of started raining right before the Davis. But I wound up basically using the same variant all day, particularly for the Davis and the Suncoast. And Litigate was only able to muster a 99 TimeformUS speed figure, which is a 3-point improvement, but not certainly one that screams Kentucky Derby. He is going to have to take several steps forward off of this. I know you could say, well, he drew the 11 post. He was able to get a good trip from there, got a good 2-wide stalking trip, didn't lose a ton of ground. And we talked about it. It wasn't the strongest field coming in. I know you really liked the horse that was 30 to 1 on the morning line. I think because of that, he ran a good third in this race, but just not the strongest field we're going to see. And it was really exacerbated when the favorite WNL just didn't show up at all.
Yeah, I think that's the important point to make. Outside of WNL, it shouldn't be a big surprise this race didn't get a fast speed figure because nobody had run that fast coming in here. And there was an incident heading into the clubhouse turn where WNL got bounced around pretty severely between horses. Another horse that really took the worst of that was Champion's Dream. And maybe it was worse than it looked because both of those horses just didn't seem like themselves. They didn't run their races. Champion's Dream just came up completely empty around the far turn. So maybe that bumping incident really negatively affected those horses. Perhaps they also didn't handle the track surface, which, as Craig was noting, even though it's rated fast, you could just tell visually the track was taking on a lot of water by the end of the day. They didn't seal it for this race, so it was just kind of left open. So that can be an unusual condition for some of these horses. But WNL, who was the big favorite coming in here, just did not show up at all. So his Derby status is very much in doubt at this point, as is the quality of that Remsen from last year. And Litigate, Craig, it's just it's hard to get too excited about a horse that barely just doesn't even break a triple-digit TimeformUS speed figure. We already had some doubts about the allowance race that he was coming out of based on the way that the winner of that race, Cyclone Mischief, had run in his next start in the Holy Bull, and it's not like Litigate had to run that much better than he did in the prior start. So I just don't know what to make of this race, and I think we've got to see more from these horses and really some more significant improvements if we're going to take them seriously as Kentucky Derby candidates. Let's move on to the Oaks prep that they ran at Tampa Bay Downs just before the Sam F. Davis. That was the Suncoast Stakes, and this one actually got a slightly higher speed figure than the Davis, Craig, but it did feature a pretty substantial upset as both of the horses that took most of the money in here, Wonder Wheel and Julia Shining, went down to defeat to the 38-1 shot Dreaming of Snow, who just wired the field on the front end.
She did. I mean, we had her shown taking the front on the TimeformUS pace projector. Speed can always be dangerous. I don't want to say she set a slow pace, but it was at best moderate. It's not quite going to make the blue speed figures, the blue coded pace figures, but it was just one of those races where nobody really did a lot of running. Even the favorite Wonder Wheel, she kind of got close in the stretch. He had every opportunity to go by, so I don't want to make too much of an excuse of the moderate pace in here and just didn't do a lot of running. I have heard people talk that maybe the track was a little bit biased. We have it coded in pink. I'm not so sure about that myself. I'm interested to hear what you think about it, particularly with the changing conditions. I should note, had the track actually been officially changed like it should have been, we wouldn't have a bias because we don't make those when the track changes conditions. But the algorithm saw it was fast all day and rated it like the track stayed the same. And I just think this was a case not so much of a speed bias track of a horse who got brave on the front end without really being challenged early.
Yeah, I did think there was a pretty significant bias at Tampa on Saturday. Just going through the races, really, aside from the first race of the day that they ran on the dirt, all the other dirt races, the paces just held together consistently, especially in the one-turn races that we'll talk about one of them in just a little bit. But, I mean, even when you look at the Tampa Bay Derby, I'm sorry, the Sam F. Davis, with the race we just talked about, Litigate came from just off the pace, but the pace setter there is Zydeco, who was a huge long shot, 43-1. He almost held on for third, was in the mix until the very end of that race. It just felt like the speed wasn't going away the way that you would have expected it to in these races. And Dreaming of Snow, I mean, she got brave on the front end. I think there is something to that because it's not like Wonder Wheel got that poor of a trip. She got a very similar trip to the one that Litigate pulled in the Sam F. Davis, and she just couldn't quite seal the deal here. She got right alongside Dreaming of Snow at the top of the stretch and could just never push on by. I think at the end of the day, Craig, we talked about it a little bit in the preview that we did last week. Even though Wonder Wheel had that big reputation coming in, and even though we expected her to be good enough to get the job done here, it's not like she had some huge speed figure edge over these horses. And really, she only regressed one speed figure point on the TimeformUS scale from her Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies win. So, I think it was just a race where maybe the field was more evenly matched than it might have been bet or that it seemed to handicappers like us going in.
Yeah, I can see that. The only horse who really improved their speed figure at all, even though it was a pretty moderate group coming in, was Julia Shining. I know you said you liked how she had worked and had gotten a little more professional. She jumped her speed figure up 10 points off of what was not the best trip, particularly if there was a speed bias, as you say. She was engaged a little more early, so maybe she's the one that you want to take out of here, though. I mean, honestly, she's never going to offer a lot of value, and she still hasn't run a particularly fast race.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think she's the one that has some potential to continue moving forward out of this race. Did take that step forward to run a faster number. I wouldn't say it was so much a rail bias at Tampa. I saw some chatter about that, so I'm not going to really hold the wide trip against her. I mean, we saw horses on the outside that had no trouble finishing off their races, and it's not like Dreaming of Snow was right down on the rail for her entire trip. But Julia Shining, she was finishing best of all at the end. It just feels like the kind of horse that this was a starting point, and she's going to do better when these distances stretch out a little bit further. And she does seem like one with forward to go out of here. Let's move on to the race run right before the Suncoast, the Pelican for the older horses, sprinting 6 furlongs. And while the favorite did win this race, Craig Sibelius, this is a race when I go back and watch that just seemed like a conveyor belt. I mean, the horses that were 1, 2, 3, 4 about a quarter mile into the race were just 1, 2, 3, 4 throughout. I mean, there was really nobody changing position here, and Sibelius got the job done, but I don't know what to make of these races at Tampa on Saturday. It just seemed like there was not a whole lot of ground being made up in the stretch.
On paper, Sibelius seemed like just a total standout based on speed figures, and he was kind of lukewarm on the board. I'm almost embarrassed to say I actually bet him when I saw the price because I couldn't believe how high he was. And on the turn, I thought he was toast. It looked like he was pressured all the way by that kind of mid-priced horse, Dr. Oscar, one that I didn't think would be able to keep up. But those two just kept right on going, and it kind of lends credence to what you're saying that speed just wasn't coming back at all at Tampa. This race looked like a merry-go-round. Sibelius ran a 120 speed figure, good solid effort, not quite as fast as last time, but as you said, not sure what to make of it when basically no horse changed positions in the superfecta.
Yeah, and we're not going to talk about it in any detail, but the other sprint stakes on the card run just before this, which we also handicapped last week, the Minaret won on the front end by 7-1 shot Drifaros, who is very similar, just got to the front end and kept finding more, and the horse that was trying to make a run from off the pace, Caramel Swirl, is the 2-5 favorite. Maybe she was a little short off the layoff, but she just seemed to be spinning her wheels and wasn't really able to make up that ground. So I just think we saw a pattern of those kinds of stretch runs where nobody was really changing position in these races at Tampa. So it's definitely something to keep in mind moving forward, especially for those 3-year-old races as we assess these horses for their next starts. And Craig, if there was a 3-year-old that generated some Derby buzz at Tampa last weekend, maybe the one that garnered the most coming out of that, and the horse that might actually go favored next time in the Tampa Bay Derby, depending on who shows up there, is the winner of the N1X allowance race on Sunday, and that is the Todd Pletcher trained Kings Barnes, who is now 2 for 2 in his career. We had talked about this horse on the Pacecast when he won his debut at Gulfstream, going the 1-turn mile. Got a solid 99 speed figure that day and had shown some professionalism coming on between horses. I don't know what to make of this performance on Sunday because he wasn't beating much and got a perfect trip, but he did at least handle the 2 turns.
He did, and he improved his speed figure up to a 106 this time. It's not quite in the Timeform US charts, but it'll be there later. I'd certainly take him over anything I saw in the Sam Davis. Looking at the speed figure and just watching the races, he looked like a horse who more distance is not going to be any problem for him at all. But he also has that good tactical speed where he can get into the race early.
Yeah, I think this Derby picture right now, there are a lot of horses that look like this. They've beaten some inferior competition, but they've impressed. I mean, I'm thinking of the Tappet Trices out there, the Verifyings. We're going to see some of them run in the Risen Star on Saturday, who also have been winning with perfect trips, like the potential favorite in their victory formation. And a lot of these horses still have some things to prove. They've got to earn the points, but they're all potential at this point, and Kings Barnes definitely fits into that category. So we'll be interested to see how he does when he faces a real test in a Kentucky Derby prep like the Tampa Bay Derby, likely next time out. Let's move on to Aqueduct, and we'll stick with the 3-year-olds for now, Craig. The Derby prep that was run there on Saturday was the Grade 3 Withers, going the 1.125 distance, and a 1.125 at Aqueduct is demanding in the middle of winter anyway, but the way this race was run really made it a true test of stamina, as they went pretty quickly on the front end. I know to the naked eye, the raw fractions might not sound that fast, but we were dealing with a very slow surface on Saturday, as is often the case at this point in the winter. So Arctic Arrogance, who was setting the pace, certainly had a right to get tired, and Hit Show got the pace that you expected him to get on paper, but he did really finish off this race to show that 9 furlongs over this kind of demanding surface was no problem at all.
Yeah, he was the 3-year-old of the week, I would say. He got a 116 Timeform US speed figure, which is very good. It was over a slow surface. We only had this Aqueduct track rated 4 on our 1 to 10 scale, so very slow. Arctic Arrogance, I thought he ran fine. He actually got a pretty big pace upgrade. The pace figures for this race were in the 150s. This is definitely one of those where you don't want to go by final or raw times. Somebody actually questioned me on Twitter about how slow did you expect them to go because it's a 48. When I plugged this final time in the formulas I used, the ideal pace for like the half mile for this distance would be something like a 50.5. I forget the exact number. So over a very demanding track, these horses, and I say these horses, it was only basically two of them up there dueling. Arctic Arrogance and the 80 to 1 long shot prove right. But they went a good 2.5 seconds faster over this tiring track. So it was a great setup for Hit Show. But that said, he took full advantage. It's not like he got up the win by a neck at the wire. He blew him away in the stretch, particularly that last eighth of a mile.
Yeah, and I don't think we explicitly mentioned the speed figures for this race. Hit Show got a 116, which is obviously much higher than the number that Litigate got. I think 17 points higher than the Sam F. Davis. And he even himself, coming from off the pace, got a bit of a pace upgrade, 5 points from the final time number of 111, which actually matches the 91 Beyer this race got. So you and Beyer are right in line with that. And as you said, Arctic Arrogance was the one that got the biggest pace upgrade. He got a 114 Timeform US speed figure for this performance. And I wouldn't get too down on him coming out of this race because, I mean, the horses that he was dueling with early are particularly proved right. I mean, he was in the mix at the quarter pole, ended up losing by 26 lengths. It looked like Andiamo Firenze might have a little bit of run left when he tried to move up into third around the far turn. He also lost this race by 26 lengths. I mean, there were horses that were just coming to a stop at the end of this race, and at least Arctic Arrogance was still trying to run through the wire, obviously not running with the same vigor as Hit Show, who seems like one that can continue on in distance. But Arctic Arrogance is the kind of horse that I've heard Linda Rice might wheel him back in the Gotham, and he's the kind of horse that could be pretty dangerous in a race like that going back to the one-turn mile because he does have some ability. But as for the winner Hit Show, Craig, Brad Cox has quite the stable of 3-year-olds on the Derby Trail right now. I think he's got a good 5 contenders at this point that are being talked about like legitimate candidates, and Hit Show, I think, has elevated himself to be near the top of that conversation.
Yeah, I'm surprised it's only 5. I haven't done. I still need to get and make that list, like I talked about last week, where you had published one for the buyers that had so many Baffert horses up near the top. But yeah, I will get to that this week. I'm gonna have some more time at the end of the week. But yeah, Hit Show. I thought he ran fine. I always have some doubt of these races that occur at Aqueduct. They don't always transfer as well because the surface is just so much different. But I have no knocks. He ran great. Took advantage of a good setup, and it's not like he was 20 lengths behind that really fast pace either. He was only a few lengths behind. So I also like that tactical speed that he has.
Yeah, and I should say, Brad Cox has more than just 5 good 3-year-olds, but I am thinking about the Derby watch that I'm doing with Brad Freeham. You already had 4 Brad Coxes on our top 20 list, and now we'll have 5 with Hit Show being added. So, I mean, just among that upper echelon of contenders, he has 5, and that's a lot. I mean, the dominance between him and Bob Baffert at this point in time is kind of mind-boggling. Obviously, those Bob Baffert runners will go to other trainers imminently, so we'll see how that develops and comment upon all of that at the time. Craig, the other 3-year-old stakes race that was run at Aqueduct on Saturday, much earlier in the day, was the Jimmy Winkfield going 6 furlongs. And I think we also saw a pretty good horse here in the winner, Drew's Gold, who is winning his 3rd start in a row. He is 3 for 3 in his career now, and a horse who had some major gait issues in his first couple of starts. So I thought it was a big positive that he actually broke with the field here and showed that improved early speed to win this race pretty easily in the end.
I was impressed by this. You always have to wonder a little bit about horses that haven't done it in New York. He did bring his maiden at Churchill, but that was way back in May when the competition is not quite as tough. He ran a much better speed figure winning his allowance race at Laurel with a 102, and he jumped all the way up to a 109 here. So good solid sprinter. I'll leave it to you. He kind of looks like a sprinter to me. Curious what you think, just because he closed a little with bad breaks. I'm not sure he's one that wants to go long, but a 109 in February for a 3-year-old sprinter is pretty good.
Like a lot of these James Chapman runners that we see, he was purchased for a pretty modest price at auction. But James Chapman's philosophy with these horses, if you've been following who he's acquired over the past several years, is he'll buy horses with a lot of pedigree that go for a small amount of money, likely due to physical imperfections or not having the perfect conformation. And I was watching on America's Day at the Races the interview he was doing with Megan Wolfendale, and he was basically saying this horse has a big pedigree and he got it for a bargain price just because he's a little offset in front with his legs. He wasn't too popular at the sale. But this horse is actually out of a dam, Frolic's Revenge, who was a multiple stakes winner from the good female family of Stormy Frolic. I mean, if this horse had had different conformation, he could have gone for a lot of money to a major stable, but that wasn't the case. And he's by Violence, who is a good sire of precocious type sprinters. So yeah, Drew's Gold definitely is showing ability on the racetrack and beat a decent field here. The pace definitely was in his favor, and this was a day, Craig, at Aqueduct, like a lot of days that we see, where it seemed like the track started out even slower than it ended up. I know that this race got a lower buyer speed figure than the TimeformUS number that you gave it. I think that you guys probably just made different decisions about when the track sped up or if it did at all. But it did seem like there was a point in the day where it got a little bit faster because the times at the start of this day were just so glacially slow. And Drew's Gold did get a 109 TimeformUS speed figure here, so a little bit lower than Hitchto, but a good step forward for him, and seems like a sprinter that might be worth following.
Yeah, it was a tricky day. We split after the third race. There was also some splits where the mile races were much slower than the shorter races. But yeah, it was a pretty obvious one to me. We had it splitting right after this race. I think it was the third race on the card. But using the same variant for the other races would have had all these horses declining, and I just don't see that.
Yeah, and the obvious comparison is the next race we're going to talk about, a maiden race that went as the sixth on Saturday for the 3-year-olds, going that same 6 furlong distance that actually had a raw time that was half a second faster than Drew's Gold winning the Jimmy Winkfield, and this one was won by Toxic Gray in a tight photo over the first-time starter Ever So Mischievous, who was highly touted, going off at as the odds-on favorite in here. Toxic Gray, though, Greg, kind of an interesting horse here, who seemed like he was taking some sneaky money. I mean, maybe I was just wrong with the morning line here. I made him 15-1 on the line, but his horse was coming out of a maiden claiming race at Tampa Bay Downs, had been a private purchase, switched into the barn of Mike Maselli, and felt like there might have been some steam behind this horse getting bet down to 7-1, and he certainly delivered on the track.
Yeah, not to defend you here. You don't need any defending for me, but I don't think that was a bad morning line at all. I just think there was some definite steam on this horse. Looking at the running line, I mean, his figure was okay at Tampa. He ran an 86, certainly above par for a maiden claimer there for late season 2-year-olds, but still, it was a pretty big jump up in class. He's going to get a big speed figure for this one. I think it was a 106. So not too far off of Drew's Gold. I don't have any problem with the variance split here. If you wanted to argue with me that he ran faster, I would argue against that all day. I still think the stake was the better race, but it was a surprising one and one where you got paid if you took note of the I guess you have to say smart money when he gets the job done.
And we should mention this runner-up, who had taken all the money, Ever So Mischievous. I wouldn't say he loses anything in defeat, this horse. I mean, he gets a 106 TimeformUS speed figure on debut, and it seemed like Manny Franco rode this horse like he expected to win by a dozen lengths. He seemed to have a ton of confidence moving around the far turn, and it looked like he got almost caught off guard by the move that Eric Cancel made with Toxic Gray, and he kind of had to motivate this horse after Toxic Gray had gained that momentum and got put in very tight and deep stretch as he was trying to get this horse to re-rally along the inside, and he almost came back. He was pretty game, made it very close at the end, but this is a horse that feels like he's going to be about 1-9 to break his maiden next time out.
Yes, maybe even 1-20. It was a good effort. He lost a lot of ground. You can look at the two horses that were in front of him early. Both finished way back, not even close. So it was a strong effort by the top two. I'd obviously, just based on the connections and the breeding, expect the runner up to have the better career going forward. But it was a strong maiden race.
We'll talk about one more race from this past week at Aqueduct. Like we were saying, not too many notable TimeformUS speed figures this week, so I threw this New York bred allowance race on the list, won by Bold Journey on Friday. This one also going the 6 furlong distance at Aqueduct. And, Craig, Bold Journey is a horse that I had kind of had an affinity for when he began his career last winter as a newly turned 3-year-old. Had looked very promising when he broke his maiden. We might have even talked about that race on the Pacecast at the time because I think he had gotten a solid speed figure that day, but had just kind of hit a plateau, maybe even got stuck in a rut as his speed figures regressed a little bit over the summer. But it seems like whatever it took this winter to get him back on track is working for him because he's taken a big step forward now as a newly turned 4-year-old. And this was a very impressive performance last Friday.
It was. We talked about Bill Mott on the forecast in Tampa and how he'd been hot. It didn't really translate at Tampa, but this is the kind of horse we were talking about where he took a nice jump up in his speed figures all the way up to a 116. I think that's at least a 10-point improvement over anything we've ever seen of him. And you're right, we did talk about him on the Pacecast. It was quite a while ago, but for some reason I remember that with him being in New York bred, it was kind of a standout figure for that time of year. And yeah, just a good solid run from him. And I doubt that it's a fluke. I expect him to keep moving forward given the way the Bill Mott barn is going, particularly with sprinters.
He actually got a 121 final time number for this race, knocked down a little bit to the 116 because of the slow pace, which he was right on top of. And I think that's a good sign for this horse because he had shown propensity to get out of the gate a little bit slowly, be outrun in the early stages, but he showed some improved tactical speed here with the slower early tempo. So all of those things are positives for Bold Journey, who I'll recall has a very nice pedigree behind him. He is the younger half brother to American Revolution, that Grade 1 Cigar Mile winner. So maybe he's finally, that class is finally coming through in the bloodlines because he did take a big step forward here, and you'd imagine he'll tackle open company next time out. Let's move on to Golden Gate Fields, a track that we don't talk about very much on this Pacecast, but every year, Craig, they do run a Kentucky Derby prep that offers some qualifying points, I think 10 to the winner of this race, the El Camino Real Derby. And I'm not really expecting this race to have major implications on the Kentucky Derby, but I will say Chase the Chaos, who did win, he's a horse that seems to be moving forward at the right time. Watching the replay, you could tell the rider was really pumped up to win this $100,000 stakes race, and just seems like a nice, honest, hard-trying horse, but hard to see him having an impact in a race like the Derby.
True. One thing to note is they do give the winner of this race entry into the Preakness as well. I guess that's a Stronach track deal. Hopefully, I hope this horse doesn't show up in the Preakness because it's probably not where he belongs. He got a 102 speed figure for this win. He's a horse who did try dirt once way at Canterbury way back in his debut, but his 3 wins now have come on turf or synthetic. So I'd be pretty skeptical of him transferring that form over to dirt.
Yeah, this is a horse that did come out of nowhere a little bit. I know he started out with the Robertino Diodoro barn, but moving in with his current trainer, the first time he stretched out in distance, he was second at 65 to 1 in the Gold Rush Stakes 3 back, and he's since proven that second place finish was no fluke as he's continued improving out of that race and seemed to handle the 9 furlongs here, even though he's a son of a Stern, who you think of as more of a turf sprint sire. Definitely more turfy, so not really viewing this horse as one that's going to be very effective on the dirt moving forward, but we'll see what direction they decide to go with him. Let's move down to Florida, back to Florida, I should say, and talk about some races from Gulfstream Park this past weekend. One that we actually handicapped as a stakes preview on DRF's YouTube channel last week was the Grade 3 Gulfstream Park Turf Sprint, Craig, and I don't know what happened. When we talked about this race, there were 10 horses, and only 5 ended up entering the starting gate. Yes, I Am Free somehow went off as the third choice of those 5. A little surprising, at least to me, since he's had so much success at Gulfstream, especially going this distance. But like I mentioned on our preview last week, for some reason, this is a horse that just doesn't get respect from the bettors.
Yeah, he does. I have no idea what happened to the field. I when I turned it on to place a bet and watch the race, I saw only 5 horses and just didn't investigate any further, was just a little disgusted. And I did watch the race. We saw Yes, I Am Free be his usual game self, getting the job done. He just always has to seem that knack for the wire. He ran a 113 speed figure, which is just about what he does. And I think if there's one thing we know about that horse, it's if you let him get in front, he is going to be really tough to pass.
Yeah, sometimes the cliche is the race is over at the start, and I think that was the case here. Once he got to the lead over Karatari, you kind of figured he was going to be able to see this one out because it's not like there were too many effective closers in this race, and all the speed that seemed like it was signed on for a horse like Belgrano just never materialized with it being scratched out of the race. So yes, I Am Free was able to hold on and get the job done here. We should say winning this Grade 3 Gulfstream Park Turf Sprint for the second year in a row. I think he is now 8 for 15 on this Gulfstream Park turf course, so just definitely loves to win at this venue. Other race that we should mention from this past week at Gulfstream Park was a Saturday maiden race, actually run right before that turf sprint, and it was going the 1 mile distance on the main track, won by Arthur's Ride. Yet another Bill Mott trainee that seems pretty promising. And Craig, this was a horse that had run twice last year at Saratoga as a 2-year-old, had faced some pretty good horses on those occasions. Most recently, he had been beaten by Instant Coffee in a September maiden race and clearly was off for a long time after that, but seems like he's taken a big step forward in the interim because this was a nice return to the races.
Yeah, I think this is the second best Timeform US speed figure we got from a 3-year-old this weekend. He ran a 114. They didn't run a lot of dirt races at Gulfstream on Saturday. There were only 3 of them, but all of the projections came back really consistent. So I'm pretty confident in this figure. The runner-up, Dreamlike, a Todd Pletcher trainee, I thought ran very well. Actually went off as the third choice. It was really close in the betting between the top 3. Those 3 all ran 1, 2, 3 in here and all ran good speed figures, but Arthur's Ride did look like the best. I mean, I don't think the other 2 were as good, although I guess you'd have to give Dreamlight some room to improve second time out.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see where both of these top 2 go from here. Clearly, Arthur's Ride had shown ability last summer, and he's bred to get better with distance as a son of Tappet. Not surprising given that very almost nearly white-gray color that he sports, but cool to see him win, especially under the jockey that was riding him, Richard Kingscott, who was the winner of the Epsom Derby last year in England, had a brief stint riding at Gulfstream Park this winter, and he did finally get a victory here under Arthur's Ride. But I'm glad you brought up the runner-up Dreamlight, Craig, for the Todd Pletcher barn. 111, that's a really strong speed figure for a horse's debut, especially going the 1 mile distance. And this one certainly has the pedigree to keep getting better with more ground, being by Gunrunner out of a full sister to Untappable, that Kentucky Oaks winner who had so much success during her 3-year-old filly season. So definitely a classic distance pedigree on him. We'll see if he can develop or break his maiden in enough time to have a shot at getting to some of those Triple Crown races. And let's finish things up by going out to California to talk about a couple of races from Santa Anita this past weekend. The feature race on Sunday was the Lady of Shamrock for 3-year-old fillies going the 1 mile distance on the turf course. And, Craig, sometimes we're a little bit dismissive or disparaging of these 3-year-old races on the turf out in California, but I will say the winner here, AG Bullet, got a speed figure that suggests that she's just as good as anything we've been seeing in these similar types of races in Florida this winter.
Yeah, I don't have the official speed figure for her yet. I'm guessing it's going to be around a 103, which would improve her 5 points off of her last race when she was sprinting. That one even had a 101 final time. It was just knocked down a little bit. There was plenty to go on. There were 3 1 mile turf races. None of them had like crazy slow or fast paces. So it was a pretty easy speed figure to make. And she's this one that seems to really be handling the turf. She improved it massively first time on it and backed up that form this time.
Yeah, that maiden win did come going 6.5 furlongs, and she was getting a little leg weary at the very end of this race. It looked like she was going to win it easier than she ultimately did in mid-stretch there. So a mile might be the absolute limit for her. We'll see what they decide to do with her. But Frankie Dettori, another jockey from overseas who's having a successful stint in the U.S. riding this winter, he got a stakes victory here. He's had a pretty strong meet so far at Santa Anita. So nice to see him pick up the mount on this horse and get the win. And we'll see how good this California Philly turf division ultimately turns out to be. And Greg, we should mention one more race from Santa Anita on Sunday. It was a 3-year-old maiden race on the dirt, going a mile, that went as the 6th race on that Sunday card. And it seemed like a pretty strong field coming in. We already had some maidens who had run some nice speed figures in their prior starts, and encouraging to see a horse not trained by Bob Baffert actually win one of these 3-year-old maiden races and break their maiden so they can run in a stakes race moving forward. And that was Skinner here, who got the job done for trainer John Sheriffs, and a horse they had gotten ambitious with last year, and seems like he's benefited from the time off.
Did, and it seemed like kind of a smart money situation as well, as he only went off 3-1 after having been at least 13-1 in all 3 prior starts. Granted, 2 of those were grade 1 stakes, so I guess he had some fans out there, some people that thought he had some ability, but he really put it together here. He's going to get, I'm guessing again, my assistant does these, but I would say he's going to get around a 111 speed figure, so it was a pretty solid effort, and it's not like he just got up. He beat some horses who had run some good speed figures as maidens and did it pretty easily.
Yeah, this is a horse that I remember some people were interested in when he ran in the Grade 1 American Pharoah last year, just because he seemed like one that was supposed to get better with added distance, even though he had been beaten by Cave Rock in the Del Mar Futurity. Prior to that, he was 3rd behind that horse, and clearly something went wrong in that American Pharoah, because not only did he fail to get the distance, I mean, he was basically eased at the end of that race, but the time away seems to have done him well. This was a pretty powerful move that he made off the far turn, and he won this race with his ears pricked at the end, so seems like one that might still have forward to go. And as a son of Curlin, distance is not supposed to be a problem. John Sheriff's a trainer that tends to bring them along a little bit slowly. So you'd imagine, based on the kind of number he got here, they could go right into stakes company. I guess it depends on whether or not they want to wheel him back in 3 weeks to try a race like the San Felipe, or maybe they'll wait the extra few weeks to go to the Santa Anita Derby with him. I imagine they have different options, but just nice to see some horses that will be competitors in these California Derby preps that are not all from one barn.
Yeah, and just a little side note, I always have to smile when people talk about John Sheriffs and how he brings them along slowly. It shows you how the game changes, because it may have been before your time, David. I'm not sure, but there was a time when he would win about 45% first off, so first time out. So it just shows the game can change. He's adapted and does things a little differently. Probably has something to do with the owners he has and the kind of horses he gets, but he's obviously a very skilled horseman because he's proven he can do things many different ways.
That's for sure. And yes, that I did not realize that about him. That definitely was before my time. But trainers do change the way that they operate over time, I think, depending on the landscape. And those 2-year-old maiden races, they've been pretty tough to win in recent years if you're not from one stable. So I think some of the trainers out in California have had to adapt to that situation. Well, those are all the races that we'll recap on the podcast this week. And as I already said at the start, this is the last podcast we're doing this week, as we already put out the forecast. So make sure you don't miss that, the preview that I did of the Risen Star card at Fairgrounds on Saturday that's already out with my guest and colleague Marcus Hirsch. We talk in detail about those 5 stakes races that are part of that sequence. So make sure to listen to that. Craig and I will, of course, be back next week to do both podcasts, but the next one we put out will be the TimeformUS Pacecast next Tuesday. So everybody, thanks for listening this week. Remember, you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Again, thanks for listening, and make sure to catch the TimeformUS Pacecast when I'm back with Craig in a week's time.